The topic today is lighting to optimize health. I am John EverBlest. Most of us live and work indoors under artificial light. Since that is not our natural estate, it's likely going to affect our health. Yet not all artificial lighting is the same. This lecture includes surprising stories of lighting that caused health problems and lightings that prevented and reversed health problems. We will also address the light and dark rhythms and the very common light-related habits that disturb our sleep, health, and well-being. Intro to lighting, 3 simple things you need to know right up front. Simple. 1, man-made lighting cannot measure up to sunlight. Number 2, the closer the light source, the artificial light source simulates sunlight, the healthier it is. Number 3, the solutions are simple. Before we talk about that, we first need to talk about the components of sunlight, which we will need to try to reproduce in our artificial lighting. 3 parts, most relevant to our health. Visible light, infrared light, you feel that in the form of heat, and ultraviolet light. Visible light, this is what allows us to see. It is literally made up of a rainbow of colors. When all those color wavelengths are present at the same time, the result is white light. But shine white light through a prism and it splits into its individual building blocks of visible color. Complete visible light has been incorrectly marketed in the world as full spectrum. Because true full spectrum includes visible, infrared, and ultraviolet light. That's what our goal would be. Prisms also separate the invisible wavelengths of light, infrared and UV. Infrared cannot be seen, but it can be felt even through a prism. And UV will still tan you through a prism. Infrared light. Invisible to the eye, but felt as heat. Effective in pain relief, inflammation, congestion, and speeding healing. Lots more, but these are the basics. Now, this is a quote from a doctor, a specialist on this thing. All right, Dr. Wunsch. I'm not sure how to pronounce that last name, but he's a German doctor that specializes in light and health. He says, near infrared is important as it primes the cells in your retina for repair and regeneration, which explains, he says, why LEDs, which are devoid of infrared, are so harmful for our eyes and health. He says, 1/3 of the energy your body consumes comes from the food you eat. The vast majority of the energy your body needs to maintain the systemic equilibrium comes from environmental infrared light exposure. That's new. Ultraviolet light. Ultraviolet is the most biologically active part of light for our overall health. It is especially known for vitamin D, tanning, sunburn, disinfecting, deodorizing, bleaching, and so many other health benefits. Now, sunlight contains about 1,500 different wavelengths, which together make up true full spectrum light. Now, God placed all 1,500 wavelengths in light for a reason. Man is mostly clueless as to why. No man-made light will ever fully measure up to sunlight, whether LEDs, fluorescence, CFLs, or incandescence. The only true healthy light is sunlight, and doctors have told us to stay out of it. The effects of different kinds of man-made lighting can be harmful, this is interesting, it's not expected. The effects of different kinds of man-made lighting can be harmful not because of the presence of any specific toxic wavelength of light, but because of the chronic absence of the complete set of wavelengths of light. This is key to understanding the cause of malillumination. Much of man-made lighting tends to be deficient. This deficiency of true full-spectrum light is termed malillumination. So remember, true full-spectrum light includes visible, heat, and ultraviolet. Fortunately, the solution is simple. To overcome the deficiencies of man-made lighting, simply combine different kinds of man-made light to make a complete set, and thus a healthier lighting system. In other words, combine visible light rays with heat rays with UV rays. More about that as we go along. Incandescent lighting, that's just your standard light bulb. Alexander Wunsch is a physician and lecturer at Wismar University in Germany and an international consultant to governments, medical facilities, and lighting industry. He states that LEDs sabotage health and promote blindness. That they limit your promote blindness? That's interesting. I'm going to make the connection right now, just so you don't miss it. It promotes blindness because there's no infrared in it, and he'll talk about that. So let's start that again. He states that LEDs sabotage health and promote blindness. Limit your exposure to blue light during the daytime and at night. Swap out LEDs for incandescents or low voltage incandescent halogen lights, both of which emit healing infrared light. He recommends clear incandescents with transparent outer bulbs, like that picture there, not the ones that are coated with the white to keep a cool white light. He says you want the 2700 degree Kelvin incandescent thermal analog energy source of that light. It's the only light I use at night, he says. He continues, it's also a good idea not to intoxicate your environment with too much light. So we know in the meantime that artificial light levels at night have reached insane intensity. The intensity of a candle, for example, is absolutely sufficient for orientation, but you and I aren't going back to candles. If you have to read in the evening, or probably even at nighttime, this is that doctor, my personal favorite light source for reading task is a low voltage incandescent halogen lamp, which is operating on a DC transformer. This is getting complicated. It's all right, I will simplify this when he's done with this paragraph. So, direct current will eliminate all the, let me back up. He uses low voltage incandescent halogen lamp, which is operating on a DC transformer. The point? So direct current will eliminate all the dirty electricity, and it will eliminate all the flicker. I'll tell you what dirty electricity is in a moment. There are, for example, transformers available where you can adjust the output between 6 and 12 volts. As long as it is a direct current, there is no flicker, there is no dirty electricity, and you are able to dim the halogen lamp into a color temperature which is comparable to candlelight even. So this is the softest, the healthiest electric light you can get at the moment. Yeah, I tried to look up these transformers that he was talking about, and the low voltage, and I couldn't find anything. He didn't have any pictures, he didn't have any brands, didn't have any model numbers. But I believe we can make this so much simpler and healthier than he's even proposing. First off, incandescents and incandescent halogens emit light and heat like a campfire or a candle, and may be dimmed to simulate those healthy nighttime light levels with a simple dimmer switch from any hardware store. It's very simple. Now, secondly, the dirty electricity that he refers to, random spiking surges of electromagnetic fields, all those things there do that. Wi-Fi does that. Radio towers do that. Cell phones do that. It's a really big problem. Now, let me read that again. The dirty electricity that he refers to may be thoroughly negated simply by grounding yourself. No DC transformers required. Now, this grounding thing may be a new thing to you, and well, let me continue. My wife and I have just started grounding ourselves as well. I'm in the middle of creating my own presentation on that topic, and it will be found in my series called Eden, God's Magnificent Outdoor Automatic Healthcare System. In the meantime, here is the link to the amazing documentary on that topic. It changes everything. It's called The Earthing Movie, and there's the link on the bottom of that thing. Take a look at that. You can pause it if you're watching this on a video and copy it. There's so much to be said about this earthing thing. I can't wait to tell that story. All right, full spectrum fluorescent lighting. The only true full spectrum light, as we've said, is sunlight. The wavelengths of sunlight that are most relevant to us are infrared, visible light, and ultraviolet. This is purposeful redundancy. All right, UV being the most biologically active. No man-made light has been created that fully and accurately and proportionally reproduces the full spectrum of sunlight, though some have come close. Man-made lights use the term full spectrum only to describe the quality of the very narrow spectrum of visible light, as we've said, excluding both infrared and ultraviolet, though. Nevertheless, even those visible full spectrum lights have been proven to be helpful to our health to some measure. Now, all three of those kinds of lights are helpful, but were they to be combined? Well, that would be a much closer to the authentic full spectrum of sunlight and would be the most healthful kind of man-made light. In the meantime, this section is about just man-made visible full spectrum light. Man-made full spectrum visible lighting was originally defined as a color rendering index of at least 95 and a color temperature of around 6,500. However, shady manufacturers have sometimes fudged these numbers and have even sometimes redefined even the definition of full spectrum so that their inferior devices can be marketed as full spectrum. So let's give a few examples of what full spectrum lamps can do versus non-full spectrum lighting. I love that picture. Hamster cavities versus lighting. 30 male golden hamsters were raised for 15 weeks on a cavity-producing high carbohydrate diet containing 60% sugar, or sucrose. Half of the group was exposed for 12 hours per day to full-spectrum fluorescent tubes with added ultraviolet light. And that was for the purpose to approximate natural sunlight, while the other half was exposed to standard cool white fluorescent light without UV, just standard cool white bulbs. So here are the numbers. Hamster cavities versus lighting. Full spectrum fluorescent plus ultraviolet for 15 weeks, the hamsters averaged 2.5 teeth with cavities in 15 weeks. The other one, cool white, just cool white, nothing else, no ultraviolet, for 15 weeks, averaged 11 teeth with cavities. 5 times more and 10 times worse. 10 times worse. And it affected their reproductive ability as well. First graders decreased their cavities by 66% under full spectrum lighting. Isn't that interesting? 3 times as many cavities were found in first graders in windowless classrooms that had only cool white fluorescent lighting, as those children in similar windowless classrooms with full spectrum radiation shielded fluorescent lighting installed. Full spectrum lighting dramatically calms hyperactive children. This is from Dr. John Ott. He's a photobiologist. First graders in a windowless school in Sarasota, Florida, showed noticeable improvement in their behavior after having the lighting change from standard cool white fluorescence to visible full spectrum fluorescence. Hyperactivity greatly diminished and overall classroom performance improved. Male rats who were cannibalistic under standard cool white fluorescent lights were cured of cannibalism under full spectrum lights, visible full spectrum lights. No infrared and no ultraviolet. Leukemia outbreak traced back to malillumination. Leukemia is a kind of blood cancer. All right, let's just tell this story. This is from John Ott as well. He's talking. In 1961, the Communicable Disease Center of the U.S. Public Health Service in Atlanta reported that a school in Niles, Illinois, had the highest rate of leukemia of any school in the country. In fact, it was 5 times the national average. He says, I made a point of visiting the school and talking with the superintendent, the head maintenance man, and also some of the teachers who had been at the school since it was built. I learned that all of the children who developed leukemia had been located in 2 classrooms, and that the teachers in these particular classrooms customarily kept the large curtains drawn at all times across the windows because of the intense glare from the extensive use of glass in the construction of the new modern building. On examining these curtains, I found that they were not completely opaque, but more of a translucent type of material that allowed some of the outdoor light to penetrate, and which gave them a greenish appearance. With the curtains constantly closed, it was necessary to keep the artificial lights on in these 2 classrooms. And I learned from the head maintenance man that the original tubes installed were warm fluorescent, which are very strong in orange-pink part of the spectrum. That's a clue. Pink, lighting, all sorts of bad stories about that. After several years of this regular procedure of keeping the curtains closed and the lights on, the classroom teachers of these 2 particular rooms left the school and their replacements preferred to leave the curtains open and the lights off unless needed. I also learned that about this time there was a general replacement of the warm white fluorescent tubes, and that the new tubes were cool white, which are not as strong in the orange-pink part of the spectrum, and which were not lit continuously, but only as needed. As of the time of my visit in 1964, there had been no further leukemia cases reported for several years. No explanation for the previous unusually high rate of leukemia at this school had ever been found. But the problem no longer existed and the situation had returned to normal. Pink seems to be particularly lacking in nutrients. Pink glasses, pink windows, pink lights, pink walls, all have unpleasant stories associated with them. Some of my other presentations weave that in there, some of those examples. All right, an entire company avoids flu epidemic by adding full spectrum lighting, visible full spectrum lighting, and UV transmitting windows. And here's the story. During the winter of 1968 to 1969, a serious outbreak of the Hong Kong flu swept the country, and Florida was no exception. The health department reported 5% of Sarasota County, or 6,000 people, sick with the flu at one time. Employee illness caused the temporary closing of 1 supermarket, a social club, and the shutdown of 2 areas of the Sarasota Memorial Hospital because 61 nurses were out sick with the flu. Obrig Laboratories, located just north of Sarasota, is one of the largest manufacturers of contact lenses and has approximately 100 employees. During the entire time of the flu epidemic, not one employee was absent due to any flu-type ailment, according to Philip Salvatore, chairman of the board. Oberg Laboratories was the first to design a new building using full-spectrum lighting and ultraviolet transmitting plastic window panes throughout the entire office and factory areas. The Oberg employees had not been given any mass inoculation against the Hong Kong flu. Mr. Salvatore also commented that everyone seemed to be happier and in better spirits under the new lighting, and that work production had increased by at least 25%. All right, black light, ultraviolet lighting. Never thought of black light as being lighting, but this is going to be a strong suggestion in this presentation. Russian factory workers experienced 50% fewer colds working under low-dose UV. What's low-dose UV? Black light. Or a high-producing sun lamp that's a long ways away, like way up there. Waiters working 18 years under black light are investigated for unusually good health and attitude. Dr. John Ott, author of Health and Light, tells of his experience with these waiters. He said, "I had dinner one evening in a restaurant known as Well of the Seas in the basement of the Hotel Sherman in Chicago. In the basement means there is no sunlight ever there, ever. It's got to be very unhealthy to live and to work for 8 hours a day in a basement." He continues, "As soon as we entered the restaurant, I noticed that there were black light, ultraviolet lights placed throughout the ceiling. They had been installed solely for ornamental purposes to cause designs on the waiters' coats, as well as the menus, to fluoresce in the otherwise subdued lighting." This is the actual restaurant. It's the best picture I could find. "I asked the captain of the waiters a number of questions in view of the general concern, especially at the time regarding the danger of overexposure to ultraviolet light. I wondered how long the lights had been installed and whether he had experienced an unusually high turnover among the personnel working in the restaurant. You know, sunlight is accused of all sorts of things, so John Ott asks these questions. I asked him if any of his men had complained of eye problems, skin cancer, and other difficulties such as sterility, which might be attributable to working for long periods of time under the black light UV. The captain told me that he had essentially the same group of men working for him as he had when they had opened the restaurant 18 years before. That's unusual. He said that the ultraviolet lights had been in use continually during that time, and that the health record of his men had been so consistently excellent that the hotel manager had checked into the situation with medical supervision to try to determine why this particular group of men was always on the job, even during the flu epidemics, when other departments in the hotel would be shorthanded because of employee illness. These folks were in the basement. I then talked to the manager of the hotel, who told me that these men working in the Well of the Seas seemed to be a particularly happy group. Courteous, efficient, and all seemed to get along well together. Well, that's interesting. That's kind of rare too. He said no explanation had been found to explain this, and that at the conclusion of the study, it was thought to be simply a coincidence that this particular group of men should be so healthy and content. I asked if the men had been given a health checkup at the time that they were hired. The manager explained that this was not customary and that the men just happened to be at the head of the list when the waiters' union was called on to staff the restaurant. I went back again on several occasions to talk with the captain and his men, and also to check to see if any of them were wearing glasses. Glasses? See if any of them were wearing glasses that would block the UV from entering the eyes, because that's a thing. Not one of them wore glasses. which is rather unusual in this day and age, and none had ever complained of any eye problems or discomfort as the result of the UV light. Yeah, I talk about that later on in another presentation. Dr. John Ott was convinced that light deprivation, which he termed malillumination, was similar in some effects to malnutrition and contribute to multiple forms of disease. His conclusion seemed to be that the black light at the restaurant apparently contained the essential nutrients to prevent malillumination. Remember, Dr. Kellogg stated that ultraviolet light was the most biologically active wavelengths of sunlight. That can be proven over and over.
I visited the Miami Seaquarium, and I noticed one area where ultraviolet blacklight fluorescent tubes had been placed over some of the aquariums. I asked the director about this, and he explained that in view of the increasing interest in psychedelic lighting, this was done just to create an eerie effect. He went on, though, to state that he had noticed within 10 days after installing the blacklight ultraviolet fluorescent tubes, a severe condition of Popeye, or exophthalmos, in some of the fish completely disappeared. He and his co-workers also noted that this added small amount of ultraviolet eliminated another very common problem, that of fin nipping. He also mentioned that he was now able to keep many rare species of fish thriving that never could be kept in captivity before.
All right, we got another clip here from the doctor again.
At a marine research laboratory, I have been very fortunate in having the opportunity of serving as a consultant. A new laboratory building has been constructed using ultraviolet transmitting plastic in all of the skylights and windows, as well as the new type of full spectrum fluorescent tube for all of the artificial lighting. Here is Dr. Frank Hoff on the right, who with his assistant are both working on a project to find a way to raise shrimp on a commercial farming basis, as has been done in the past with catfish. In the old laboratory, under standard cool white fluorescent lights, the chief problem encountered was that of cannibalism. In the new laboratory, under the ultraviolet transmitting plastic and the full spectrum fluorescent tubes, which are very seldom used, this problem of cannibalism has disappeared.
Isn't that interesting? All right, black light blue filtered. Both LED and fluorescent black lights produce UVA. But that incandescent bulb you see in the picture there, that standard one, does not produce UV. Don't buy those. The rest, however, can be distributed about the house to help overcome our chronic deprivation of ultraviolet light. I have some hanging in around my house as well. So, do black lights cause cancer? Exposure to UVA from black lights is well below this is a quote, exposure to UVA from black lights is well below the recognized safe limits and is not hazardous to people using them, working in their vicinity, or who have them in their home. Exposure from black lights would be much lower than your exposure to UV outdoors. And there's the reference there for it in the bottom. So the application, the use of black light in our health ministries will not trigger a government shutdown because it flies below the radar. It's low dose UV. All right. Unlike the dark, this is black light, unfiltered black light. Unlike the dark black lights, unfiltered black lights emit dim, pale blue, nearly white, visible light, thereby providing some additional healthful properties found only in visible light. For instance, this same visible blue light is all that is needed to cure jaundice in newborn babies. Interesting. All right, LED lighting. While LED lights are up to 95% more energy efficient than incandescent bulbs, we are paying for that savings with our health. This is that Dr. Wunsch again. A physician and lecturer at Wismar University in Germany, Alexander Wunsch is an international consultant to governments, medical facilities, and the lighting industry. His message, though often ignored, is clear. Blue light, isolated from all other colors on the light spectrum, is damaging our retinas and disrupting our endocrine system, resulting in all sorts of physical and mental illness. This is his recommendations. LEDs sabotage health and promote blindness. So limit your exposure to blue light during the daytime and at night. Swap out LEDs for incandescent or low voltage incandescent halogen lights, both of which emit healing infrared light. I call these LEDs Trojan horses because they appear so practical to us. They appear to have so many advantages. They save energy, they are solid state, are very robust, for example. But we invited them into our homes, but we are not aware that they have hidden properties which are harmful to our system, harmful to our mental health, harmful to our retinal health, and also harmful to our hormonal health and endocrine health. For the vast majority of Earth's history, evening lighting was dim and involved fire and heat, but no UV. So let's see Dr. Ott's lighting recommendations below. Since the 1950s, jaundice in newborn babies has been successfully treated with blue light. Westinghouse made a very strong blue light for this purpose, but it tended to nauseate the nurses. And if it is making the nurses sick, what does it do to the babies? Dr. John Ott worked with Dr. Gerald Lucy, professor of pediatrics at the University of Vermont College of Medicine, and they now use full-spectrum fluorescent lights containing the normal amount of blue in sunlight. This corrects the jaundice and gives the infants a balanced dose of wavelengths, and the nurses no longer get sick. Full-spectrum fluorescence. He continues, in the early 60s, Dr. John Ott was, this is not him, this is Dr. Kondrat. In the early 60s, Dr. John Ott was approached by Dr. Thomas Dickinson, who was researching the effects of different drugs on the eye. Much to their surprise, retinal cells responded the same way to light as chloroplasts in plants. They observed granules moving in a similar pattern in response to blue, red, and natural light. The granules tended to clump in blue light, havoc under red light, but normal flow under natural light. This surprised Dr. Dickinson, since strong drugs do not affect the cells as much as light did. So his recommendations: combine visible full-spectrum fluorescent lighting with unfiltered black light, ultraviolet, for much more complete and healthy lighting system. And this is Dr. John Ott's device right here. A fixture, it's a box, a fixture with 2 visible full-spectrum fluorescent bulbs and 1 unfiltered UV black light. You can see that there's that short little blue light in there. That's the unfiltered UV black light. So, could be used for both a sad light and a healthy lighting. I've heard of people that have used these when they were still making them, when they were still legal. These were so effective, and I owned one of these. It was so effective that government had to step in and make it illegal to sell. So, if we can't buy or sell a sad light with UV in it, then we just have to make our own, or just supplement the full spectrum bulbs with black light fixtures, preferably unfiltered black light. The closest consumer bulb to true full spectrum light, the sun lamp. They don't really make these anymore. Well, they've kind of repurposed them as iguana lamps or reptile lamps, and they lowered the power and strength of them. But you can still find these on eBay, used, lost in a closet for years and years. This includes bright white visible light, infrared light or heat, and ultraviolet light. This was the healthiest man-made light. It should have been built right into our homes and work lighting. But since it uses UV, this one is not good for evening lighting. This is an interesting place. This is on top of a skyscraper in New Jersey. Sun lamps installed high above do not require protective glasses. They act like true full-spectrum lighting, visible, infrared, and ultraviolet light. And since it's so far away, it works out to be very low-dose UV. Yeah, that sort of place isn't even legal anymore. We'd have to do that on our own. Glowing lights. All right, it's not home lighting here, but it's a light in our homes that is adversely affecting our health, mind, and well-being. Here's a quote from that PhD in the bottom there. Screen tech has profoundly affected the brains of an entire generation. Brain imaging research is showing that stimulating glowing screens are so dopamine activating to the brain's pleasure center as sex. As well. And a growing mountain of clinical research correlates screen tech with disorders like ADHD, addiction, anxiety, depression, increased aggression, and even psychosis. Most shocking of all, recent brain imaging studies conclusively show that excessive screen exposure can neurologically damage a young person's developing brain in the same way that cocaine addiction can. Now, while an expose on this topic is beyond the scope of this presentation, a warning is given here because the constant screen use facilitates malillumination via the inferior quality of the light, the alarming amount of time spent staring at it, and the addictions it triggers that result in a chronic indoor lifestyle that keeps us sequestered away from God's whole healing sunlight and the blessings of nature. So I highly recommend Nicola's book, Glow Kids, and Scott Ritzma's Media on the Brain seminar, which deal exhaustively on the subject. All right, night lights. Almost done here. Exposure to even very dim light during sleep, even if it does not noticeably impair our sleep, may affect our brain function and cognition during the day. Who'd have figured? Sleeping under only 10 lux, and we'll explain 10 lux in just a moment. Sleeping under only 10 lux conditions decreased activation in brain region involved in response, inhibition, attentional control, and the detection of relevant cues when performing a task the following day. It messes with our memory and our comprehension. Animal research found that nighttime exposure to only 5 lux for 3 weeks in a row produced depression-like symptoms and impaired cognition. To get an idea of how dim a light intensity of 5 or 10 lux is, well, 1 lux is equal to the brightness of a surface illuminated by a candle placed 1 meter away from the surface. Twilight is just about 11 lux. An object illuminated by the light of the moon is about 1/10 of 1 lux. Our melatonin level inversely rises and falls with light and darkness, and both our physical and mental health is intricately tied to this rhythm of light and dark. When it's dark, our melatonin levels increase, which is why we may feel tired when the sun starts to set. Conversely, when we are exposed to bright artificial lighting at night, including blue light emitted from TVs and electronic screens, we may have trouble falling asleep due to suppressed melatonin levels. So let me give you here a real-life example. A while back, I was working on a design project for San Diego Academy. I worked at a job during the day, so I could only work on this freelance project at night. Now, all through that project, about a week and a half, I was suffering from severe insomnia, and I couldn't understand why. Yet when the project was done, the insomnia began to go away. So it finally dawned on this dense head here what had been the cause of my insomnia. I had been using a backlit tracing table every night, such as you see here. And every night it was resetting my biorhythms as though the sun had just come up, and it made me wide awake. As the sun goes down, our best practice is to dim the lights as we near bedtime. And by the way, some out there are advocating that those with seasonal affective disorders, SAD, should use their SAD light boxes in the evening. And they gave their reasoning. Didn't make any sense. But that's madness. It resets them. Absolutely wrong. We are to simulate God's natural order of things, not work against it, else we will pay a price. So if you have trouble waking up or staying awake in the morning for your devotions, then start every morning with a bright light in your eyes before and or during your reading time. Many sleep problems can be resolved and health and cognition boosted by making sure to, 1, avoid blue light and bright light after sunset. Sleep in total darkness, no night lights brighter than the moon or stars. And this is the reference for that. Yeah, about that reference. The reference link on this slide was for the previous info that we had just read on night lights. But it no longer links to the article. Years of Dr. Mercola's medical research was taken down, censored, when President Biden singled him out along with 11 others who were the most guilty of misinformation online during the pandemic. They told the truth, and they were censored for it. Now, I talk about that in detail in my presentation, Deceived by Pharmakeia, Part 3, for such a time as this. Very telling. This is from Ellen White, Counsels Concerning Proper Rest. Make it habit not to sit up after 9 o'clock. Every light should be extinguished. 2 things. Go to bed by 9, shut off every light. This turning night into day is a wretched, health-destroying habit, and this reading much by brain workers up to the sleeping hours is very injurious to health. It calls the blood to the brain, and then there is restlessness and wakefulness, and the precious sleep which should rest the body does not come when desired. We did not know that. Should have. I know from the testimonies given me from time to time for brain workers that sleep is worth far more before than after midnight. She does not explain why. 2 hours good sleep before 12 o'clock is worth more than 4 hours after 12 o'clock. I think she's especially addressing this to brain workers. All right, we summarize this whole thing. This is the last slide here. The ideal lighting has visible light, UV light, and infrared, but we don't want UV at night. Good lighting, as opposed to ideal lighting, good lighting, full spectrum, 95 CR, color temperature around 6500. You can make better with supplemental UV, unfiltered black light. You can supplement around your house. The best light at night, dimmable incandescence or incandescence halogen, because both emit healing infrared and can be dimmed. Colored lighting. Avoid the use of red light either as lighting or therapy because it causes havoc to our eyes and it's unnecessarily stripped of its nutrients, just like junk food. Sleep in the dark. No night lights brighter than the full moon or starlight. Target 9 p.m. bedtime. 2 hours good sleep before 12 o'clock is worth more than 4 hours after 12 o'clock. Now, keep in mind two things. There's no such thing as a perfect man-made lighting source. Sunlight changes its brightness, UV levels, and infrared levels throughout the day and the seasons, which was not taken into account when the definition of visible full spectrum was determined. So, don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. Find what you can find and use that. But if you're waiting for perfect, you're never going to find it. All right, the general principle of all this is brightness, infrared, and UV during the day. The closer to sunlight, the better. Low visible light at night with infrared, but no UV. The closer to candles or a campfire, the better. We need both the light and the dark cycles for optimal health. And folks, that is the end of this presentation. Thanks for watching.